So good morning and welcome back. We are going to jump into part 2 of our World War II series, part 2 of 3 perhaps. So we're going to pick up where we left off from part 1. Essentially, Germany has bombed the daylights out of Britain. They find that they're just unable to really plan an amphibious invasion to put landed troops in there, so tanks aren't even an option, let alone land troops. So Hermann Göring, who is the head of the Luftwaffe, the Air Force of the German military, the Wehrmacht, convinces Hitler that, this is, I know Dunkirk didn't go as well as we wanted to, because Göring had greatly inflated the Luftwaffe's capabilities. So they settle for massive bombings, initially of military targets. Then they move on to the British cities, London in particular. They want to just break British morale. They want to make them quit. But Winston Churchill knows, like, listen, I know why you're doing this. And, it's the only move you have because you can't land troops in England to fight a proper war. So we can survive. You see, the British, they have a secret weapon. I know we talked about in part 1 how the Nazis and the German Wehrmacht, the German military, they had Pervitin. So they are fighting for days on end without sleep, almost like superhumans. And they have the Blitzkrieg. They've got these things going for the Germans. Well, the British have radar. And pretty soon all parties will have radar, but the British brilliantly employ radar here because they know the only thing they really have to look out for are airborne attacks. So with radar, they're able to find the positions of the Luftwaffe, and they are able to then send out the Spitfires, some of the other fighter planes that are new to the Royal Air Force that the British have in their possession, and they are going to deal some serious losses to these Luftwaffe dive bombers. So the British Air Force is really holding its own. And it's because of this that Hitler realizes we're going to have to postpone the invasion of Britain indefinitely. And it's also because the Royal Air Force goes on the attack, and they do attack Berlin. So the bombing of British cities is really kind of in retaliation for this as well. Now, this is where Hitler starts to show some really poor decision making. This is where the initial successes, the stunning early victories, kind of get bogged down a little bit. They're going to have some more, especially initially, but this is a crucial first mistake. This is kind of like Pandora's box. Once you make this decision, you can't go back. And the decision is to attack the Soviet Union. Now, why on earth have you failed to learn the lesson of World War I, which was you don't fight a two-front war? Hitler should know better than this. But the thing is, he's wondering, why is it that we keep bombing the daylights out of the British and they don't quit, they don't stop, they keep fighting on, well, maybe it's because they're convinced that one day they're Soviet, they might get some Soviet support. Now, what's odd here is that Stalin knows eventually Hitler's going to have designs on Russia. He wrote about it in Mein Kampf, My Struggle, that the destiny for the German peoples, we need look for no further than Russia, due to the massive land mass and sheer agricultural scale. If you're looking for Lebensraum, if you're looking for living space for German people, then look no further than Russia. This could be a great spot. The only problem that Hitler has is it's full of Untermenschen, as he would call them, basically subhumans, the Slavic people. He thinks they're well, obviously we know about Hitler, but he thinks of a lot of people as being disgusting subhumans, less than the German, the ideal German or Aryan race. that he champions. More on that, when we get into the origins of the Holocaust, certainly. But the thing here to appreciate is that, Stalin knows that one day this is going to happen, perhaps, but Stalin also kind of has this idea that, no, we're good. He's kind of convinced the Russian people that, we're good because we have this non-aggression pact that we signed with Hitler, and we divided up Poland together. So, we're kind of homies. Hitler knows that one day he wants to invade the Soviet Union, but he really should have stayed off and just concentrated perhaps on England from a military standpoint, because now he's inviting travesty. He's inviting the two-front war. You haven't successfully dealt with one enemy, and now you're going to create another one. So he's convinced himself, despite this non-aggression pact, this treaty, that he's already signed with Russia, with Stalin, with the Soviet Union, I should say, that, we're okay, we're going to hold off, you do your thing, we'll do ours. Well, he's going to decide to move against that because he's somehow convinced himself that they will come to the aid of Great Britain. So what if we were to just attack them and maybe smash them? After all, in his idea, in his mind, these are Untermenschen. These are subhumans. These are less than people. They're not really up to snuff, and because they're inferior, inherently their military has to be inferior. They have a pitiful army. And perhaps initially he's not so wrong about this, and therefore they could be defeated quickly. So, sending his methed out Nazis to the Eastern Front, they're going to begin the invasion of the Soviet Union. So just to go back quickly, so we have British radar that helps the British out, especially when it comes to the dogfights that happen in the air. Very soon, most parties will have access to radar. And then we have Operation Barbarossa that's going to be launched, which is the invasion of the Soviet Union. So here we have from Germany a brief period of time, and we have to kind of look here to Romania. We can't see it on the map, but Greece as well. There's going to be some issues here before we can really launch Operation Barbarossa, because you can see the span of territory that they're going to have to launch various army groups to attack Russia properly, because it's such a sprawling space. I mean, we're talking about 1,800 miles that need to be covered in an offensive line here to properly invade this land force, this landmass, I should say. So what winds up happening, though, is before they can really do that, in the spring of 1941, they need to line up all their ducks in a row. So the Balkans present a problem. This is going to be Stalin's first tip that, the truce between Hitler and Stalin, between Germany and the Soviet Union, has basically failed, because Stalin had designs on the Balkans, and Hitler is going to kind of invade that territory. So, he's getting the political cooperation of Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania especially becomes a big supporter, because they want to seize territory that they had lost to the Soviet Union, these regions, particularly Romania. Mussolini continues to be kind of like this inept, brother in arms for Hitler. Every time he tries to launch some sort of, military invasion or excursion, it never seems to pan out. The Italian army just doesn't seem up to snuff. And always Hitler has to send in troops to lend aid and support. So it's drawing away, kind of draws away. So they're going to get Greece in line. They need to secure Greece because they're worried about British air bases in Greece and, attacks from the Royal Air Force. So they managed to successfully secure these territories. And then Yugoslavia as well as Greece fall in line on the Balkan flank come April 1941. And now we have the ability to plan out and launch in the summer of 41 this massive offensive, Operation Barbarossa. And we're going to just blitzkrieg. This is like the #1 German military strategy. Just overwhelming damage from a distance. First the Luftwaffe with the Air Force, then any sort of artillery you can line up, then you send in the tanks, and then you send in the land troops in that order. So this is going to be a massive offensive. We need to do this before the brutal winter hits. Good thing we got an early start. Now, ideally, Hitler wanted to do this in the spring, but he had to waste that time to secure this territory right here in the Balkans. So now that we've wasted time doing that, helping Italy out, and Mussolini, his other fascist ally, now we can launch these attacks. And this is where we see these initial attacks, right? We're going to push, the Wehrmacht pushes to Leningrad. They're going to push to Moscow, just 25 miles outside the capital of the Soviet Union. They're going to push to take the Crimea, which is right here where we can see Sevastopol. They need to take Crimea because that's going to be their window to getting into the Caucasus Mountains, and that's going to be a big deal. They're going to push through the Ukraine. And very quickly, I mean, they're covering a massive territory, like I said, 1,800 miles. They're going to capture 2 million Russian soldiers. Now, this is a severe setback for just about any contemporary military system. 2 million soldiers captured. For the Russians, it's kind of a drop in the bucket. You know, it's not good. It's definitely not good, but for Stalin, you know, it's kind of just a statistic. I mean, he's got plenty more bodies where that came from. And the Germans are going to realize this the closer and the closer they get into Soviet territory. So they're going to seize, 2 million Russian soldiers. They sweep through the Ukraine. They drive and besiege the city of Leningrad successfully. They're right outside Moscow, the Soviet capital. Everything's looking pretty good for them until winter hits in 1941. Things take a stark turn come November of 1941. The movement sort of stalls out. It stalls out for a couple of reasons. One, there's going to be 3 brilliant generals that Russia will have, and we're going to talk about 2 of them a little bit later. But the first one we'll talk about right now is General Winter, right? This is historic. Napoleon learned this. The Mongols that well before Napoleon that invaded into Russia learned this. The winters are particularly brutal. It's going to be minus 30 degrees for the German soldiers who are besieging these Russian cities when winter hits. Minus 30 degrees. It is brutal. It is crippling. So we go from, and we're going to revisit this Caucasus Mountains to Stalingrad because this is going to be a major moment, a huge turning point in the war effort in favor of the Allies. But I just want you to appreciate, I'm going to show you a couple images here, old General Winter here. Because Hitler had felt that they could beat this inferior people and their inferior military system, they didn't properly equip the German army with winter uniforms initially, particularly the best, the German Army 6th Group, which was said to be comprised of really the best of the best that Germany had to offer. They're also ill-equipped. Eventually they'll get winter gear, but even then the winter gear, it's just not suitable for sustained periods of time outside in minus 30-degree weather. It's too punishing. And because they're not well equipped with just what they're wearing, with their articles of clothing, they're also not well equipped with food, with oil, with fuel. All these things are going to start to run out. They're going to start to deplete. The winter is so punishing. And it kind of starts like this, if you can think about it in chain of events for the German military. You have food, okay, well, we ran out of rations. What do we have left? Well, we have horses. Well, as you can see from this image, we have this group of German soldiers eagerly awaiting a meal from one of the horses that they were using for transportation as a beast of burden. Well, they are butchering it to eat. And when you run out of horse meat, what do you have left? Well, you have nothing. Because Stalin has ordered, and this is something that Germany has been relying on, you seize the resources of the territory that you conquer, that you take over. Well, they've been doing slash and burn tactics, the Russians, under the order of Stalin. So villagers have been burning their villages. They have been removing edible food, crops, and anything that they couldn't move and relocate further away from the German offensive. They have to simply burn. So there's really nothing for the Germans here. And then, of course, with the lack of horses and the ability to even feed them, let alone yourselves, comes the lack of fuel and oil. And all these mobile tanks come to a freezing halt. They simply stop. And we can see even the bodies of several fallen soldiers on the field of battle due to the harsh winter conditions, due to starvation. The second thing that the Russians are going to do as a counteroffensive starts to build, a counterattack in December of 1941, is that, and this is really offensive to the Germans, they sort of value women in the form of, wife and mother. There are contributors, there are women who serve in the Wehrmacht, but, in the capacity of, say, like nurses, aides. But the real goal is for women to breed and to have, ideally male babies who will one day grow up to become proud German soldiers. Well, Stalin doesn't have those values that Hitler has, you could say. We are all comrades in the Soviet Union. And so women are expected to serve in every capacity that a man serves. So there's going to be about 1 million female soldiers that the Soviet Union. So this is 1 million. That's just a staggering number in and of itself, right? And so when German soldiers are pushing into Russia and they start to encounter resistance from female soldiers, they are not expecting this. They are kind of shook by it. They're stunned, really. They're also stunned at their capabilities because of that 1 million, about 50% of the female soldiers of the Soviet Union during World War II will be active military combatants, which is something that the Nazis and even the German army just are not familiar with. It's a foreign concept, and they're taken aback by it, they're stunned by it, and it actually is a surprising tool. Now they're going to use this as propaganda. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister under Hitler, is going to use this as, see, this is how inferior they are. They don't even value, the culture of wifedom and motherhood that we do. They don't protect their women. They put them in harm's way. The fact that they have to rely on women shows how inferior they are as both a people and as a military. Well, the problem is 50% of them serve in the military. The other 50% are trained combatants, but they serve in the capacities of like field nurses. So they're actively going on the field of battle and having to recover bodies and treat the wounded. Women, of course, just like in the Soviet Union, as they do in the United States and in Britain and in Germany, are going to wind up working in the factories to produce munitions and other goods and materials. But these combatants are no joke. They're going to put women as combatants primarily in three distinct positions. One, as fighter pilots, of which the first female fighter pilot that's going to roll out in a major counteroffensive will land about 2 solid Luftwaffe kills to her record on her first day out. There are going to be tank engineers and drivers and operators. That's the second major role that women will play, operating some of these tanks that they have been accustomed to working on and helping to construct in the factories, as they have a greater familiarity with them. And of course, snipers. So we have an image here of Ludmila Pavlovich, and there are many of these distinguished female snipers during World War II, but we can see Ludmila here, who accumulates a staggering record to her name. And this is something that's going to become increasingly prevalent in the early days of the counteroffensive from the Soviet Union. And we're going to talk about why that is once we get to Stalingrad. So as they're held up in the Soviet Union and things slow down, things elsewhere are going to ramp up drastically. Hitler had made this non-aggression pact with Japan. They are technically allies, and the agreement is if one country goes to war, the other country goes to war, right? If war is declared on one country, then the other country has to go to its aid. So Hitler has kind of, it's in the back of his mind, he's aware of it, but like he's preoccupied elsewhere. Japan is going to change everything. So what's going to wind up happening is that on December 7th, 1941, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt will come to say, a day that will live in infamy, they're going to make this attack, a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Now the reason for this is that Pearl Harbor is a massive naval base where, for the most part, the majority of the American fleet, this naval fleet, is stored, it's docked there. We have 350 aircraft, we got 18 ships, and we have plenty of Navy sailors that are going to be destroyed. As we can see from these numbers, it's a devastating attack that occurs early in the morning on December the 7th. But why? Why would they do this? Well, Japan was heavily reliant on U.S. oil and steel scrap, and their assets were frozen. The United States put economic sanctions on them to sort of say, we're not going to support your increased aggression in the Pacific as you continue to sort of take over territory after territory. Well, so Japan realizes what we need to do is then take over more Asian, more European colonies in the Asian world, in the East Pacific, as a means to accumulate any raw resources that we can perhaps take advantage of. And then we're going to have to rely more heavily on our German allies as well for other material goods. But no doubt, oil and steel scrap are precious. They need it to keep the war machine running, literally. So they figure with these economic sanctions, that means that the Americans are preventing Japan's idea of creating their own community, their Asian community, i.e. the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere is what they're going to call it. Essentially, they want to fly the flag of the rising sun over all of Asia, to unite all of Asia under the Japanese banner, to replace any sort of European, colonial or imperialistic powers under a Japanese authority. Well, to do this, you need oil. You need steel scrap for planes like the Japanese Zero, as well as for naval ships, destroyers, aircraft carriers, that sort of thing. You got to keep the war machine moving. Well, they decide that if they're against us by putting these economic sanctions, by freezing Japanese assets in America, then the only thing to do is to recognize that if they're against us, then they are our enemy, and we need to attack them, and we need to make sure that they don't join in on the fight against us at a later date. So it's best just to cripple them and get America knocked out right away. So we have this devastating attack on Pearl Harbor. I mean, it is fast, it is ferocious, as we can see from the images. 3,500 naval men will lose their lives in this attack. And as a result of it, many ships. However, the one thing that the Japanese had not planned on, they did not take into account, was that the war is going to change how certain pieces of technology are utilized. The naval destroyers, the ships that they sunk, they're really not the big deal that they were, say, in World War I. It's going to be the aircraft carrier that changes the game. That's going to be where the real winner is as far as engaging in naval battles. To have a ship that you can load up with aircraft and that you can fly over the seas to bomb ships as well as enemy territory. All of America's aircraft carriers are undocked. They are not at Pearl Harbor, and therefore they are not bombed. This is an oversight. So they temporarily freeze American mobility because they didn't even plan to get into the war yet. But now that they are, yes, it's true that they have temporarily frozen American mobility, but the all precious aircraft carriers are unharmed. So they're going to be able to very much engage the Japanese in horrendous naval battles in the near future. The Japanese, with the attack on Pearl Harbor, they also on the same day attack the Philippines, American territories. They advance on Malaya. They take the Dutch East Indies. So this is a very well coordinated attack, a multi-pronged attack, and it's highly successful. It's their version of the Blitzkrieg. And by the spring of '42, almost all of Southeast Asia and most of the Western Pacific is basically under Japanese control. The only thing, while we have Hideki Tojo, who is basically the military dictator of Japan, formerly a general, he has basically seized control. Emperor Hirohito is still Emperor of Japan, but he's more of a figurehead at this point. He reigns in his majesty, and he's worshipped as, his lineage as a son from the sun goddess Amaterasu. So in Shintoism, he's still very much a religious figure that the Japanese people will worship. But he doesn't have the real military power or authority. That all rests now on Hideki Tojo. And it's his idea to attack these American bases. It's his idea to create this greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, to destroy the U.S. fleet in the Pacific by attacking Pearl Harbor. And it's also his thought that once this is done, the Roosevelt administration is simply going to accept Japanese domination in the Pacific, and that'll be that. Well, he couldn't have been more wrong. Because under Hideki Tojo is Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He is the one who is ultimately responsible for giving the command that will launch the attack on Pearl Harbor. And he greets the fighter pilots of the Japanese Zero, who will eventually become known as the kamikaze, because they will give their lives. When they run out of munitions and bombs, they will gladly drop their planes into their target to destroy their target. And he greets them all with a shot of sake in the morning before they begin their flight, because he knows many of them will not come back home. And when it's all said and done and many of them are celebrating, he is distraught, because he says this famous quote, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." And sure enough, President Roosevelt will address the nation of the United States. And in this great speech, he has this now famous quote when he was referring to the attack, "A day that will live in infamy." And he calls on Congress to declare a state of war between Japan and the United States. And it passes, no doubt. As a result of this, America is going to find their allies with other forces that are embroiled in war with Japan, such as nationalist China, under the command of Chiang Kai-shek. Right now, though, Mao Zedong, who is leading the communist forces of China, is basically waiting in the wings very intelligently. They're going to wait until the aftermath to attack the weakened nationalist Chinese forces. And this is where communism will hold sway in China after World War II. The other thing that he's miscalculated on, and in this aspect I talk about Adolf Hitler, is that Japan would launch this attack on America. What are you doing? Why would you do this? I opened up a two-front war and now I got to worry about the Americans coming over? Well, Hitler's ultimately going to have to declare war on the United States 4 days after Pearl Harbor, once the United States officially declares war on Japan. They're embroiled. Japan reaches out, and Tojo reaches out to Hitler and says, "Hey, we got this agreement, this treaty. If one of us gets declared war on the other, right? Yeah, if one goes to war, the other goes to war, right?" And so he's like, yeah, okay. So ultimately, this is going to bring in a new power late in the game, much like in World War I. America's going to step in, kind of fresh. A little bit of a setback, no doubt, with the attack on their fleet, but this is going to be a major turning point, just the involvement of the United States in this war effort. And now we truly have a global war. So as a result of this, of Japan attacking the United States and Germany attacking the Soviet Union, Great Britain now has two new major allies. And they're all going to meet up and they're going to agree to set aside any sort of political differences. And by that we mean, Great Britain and the United States with communist Soviet Union. And we're just going to completely lend aid to one another as best we can and fight the Axis powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. And we're going to do so until they surrender unconditionally. There will be no favorable conditions for them. We are going to force surrender. And that is that. And this becomes the Grand Alliance. And they have to make this pact because they know Hitler has in the past been able to divide his foes. So we will continue next session with part 3 as we get into the European theater and what's going on in Russia, and of course American involvement in the Pacific. Until then, I will see you all